Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen, and whether it's been a day, a few hours, or a few minutes, I hope you've had a wonderful time since I last saw you. For some reason, I'm quite excited about this video. Now, a few housekeeping things before we start. Number one, I said to you that there would be the potential for a mic stand for this video, and I'll actually show it to you. It's here, it's just too big currently for my desk, so I'll hopefully do some DIY, make it work, and we will have it for team selection and solving problems today/tomorrow, depending on when you're watching this. Secondly, this is being filmed during the Ipswich, Brighton, and Man United Southampton game, so the rank will change a little bit, or it has to go down because I don't have any of the players, and in general, I won't be able to take any insights from there and bring it to here. So that's another thing. Like I said, I am quite excited about this video. Having reviewed the topics, because I obviously made the slides, it's quite interesting, and there's one particular thing I look forward to discussing. If you have not subscribed around here, I would be very grateful if you consider doing so, and actually do so as we push for 7,000 subscribers. The call for myself to increase the likes has happened over the last few videos, so for that I am very grateful. And without anything else needing to be said, let's get into it. My favorite section, whenever it is one, captaincy. 4 primary candidates this week: Mohammed Salah, Cole Palmer, Alexander Isak, and the very deserving Chris Wood, who, for his performances this season, not just goal, but performances, certainly deserves to at least enter the category once. Now, we are going to start with him, and whilst I have said that, he's still my least favorite option by quite some margin. Why? Well, as I told you, this is being recorded during the United game, so maybe Southampton are getting beat 10-2, and this analysis doesn't look so good. However, it has been my opinion for a very long time that this Southampton side, they shouldn't at least be as bad as they're made to look, or as the points table would reflect. They've got a lot of good players. And I don't think this is just a slam dunk. I don't think any team in the Premier League right now is a slam dunk. I think the league is just at such a high level of quality. And even the sides who boast systems which are more aggressive, which are more susceptible to conceding a lot of goals in one particular game, even those guys have so much talent, and the coaching staff and the manager is so good that it's actually difficult to really put teams away this year. Obviously, I know Brentford put 5 past them away at Southampton, well, away at their ground, but I don't think that will be an every game occurrence. The other thing I mentioned here is something I don't really speak about too much on YouTube. It's always a part of my, not always, but very often part of my decision-making process. And for certain reasons, I don't really speak about it too much, but I am going to here. I like the Southampton manager and what I've seen from his personality. Now, you may think I'm not fit to judge his personality. That's one reason I don't speak about it too much. But considering I'm only saying kind things about him, I think more good here. Firstly, I think he's got courage with the way he's played and set his teams out to play so far. He hasn't gone all the way into his shell and like really set up a compact 4-4-2 deep block, and he just coached that. Right, he could have, but he hasn't. And also, when I hear him speak about his side, I do genuinely think he thinks that he's got good enough players to go and produce something and produce somewhat of a miracle and get out of this relegation battle. And he genuinely thinks that they can get out of this, not just because of the players, but it's just the general faith. And I think this will go into the players, and as such, I think you can expect a slightly better performance, at least at some point, at least some upturn somewhere, right? So that's that. I don't think this is as much of a slam dunk as it may appear. See what happens with Man United tonight. The second thing is, moving on to Chris Wood, is there's a lot of things about Chris Wood which I don't like for the captaincy. One, he's only hauled twice this season. As good as he's been, he's only hauled twice this season, and his hauls were 12 and 13 pointers. He doesn't appear to have the ceiling that Palmer, Salah, or Isak has, and that's a big no-no for me when I'm going for captaincy. When I look at captaincy, especially in weeks like this where it's on, right, there's some big hauls potentially around the corner, I want to maximize my ceiling, and he doesn't do that for me, right? The second thing is Southampton's 3 at the back. 3 at the backs in general, like if you could compare it, back 2s compared to back 3s, and like hauls compared to against both the sets of defenses, obviously there's a much smaller sample size with the 3 at the back games, but in terms of maybe points per game or hauls per game, I would say it'd be much higher for the back 4s as opposed to the back 5/back 3s, especially for the centre forwards. So I don't think that's particularly good either. And then I would say Forest's strongest suit is sides who operate in a somewhat aggressive mid-block, and they can have a combination of transitioning on them, but also scoring some goals from settled possession, which is where Chris Wood can certainly hurt you if Forest's attacking dynamics are optimal, or at least performing on the day. Now, I don't think that Southampton will take that approach. And when you combine that with everything said prior, especially his ceiling, and the fact that rightly or wrongly, I don't think Forest have shown themselves to be the side who are going to score 5 goals past the team, or at least is it likely for them to score 5 goals past the team. Whereas, for example, someone like Chelsea, okay, fine, we scored 1 against Bournemouth, but we could have scored 3, 4, maybe even 5 in that first half. We really could have. Whereas I don't think Forest's performances have been similar in that sense. And when I'm captaining someone, I really do want the upside present. And I don't think it is with Wood. I think the floor's brilliant, but not so much the ceiling. And as such, for me, when the other options exist, I wouldn't be going here. So as is often the case, we come on to the top 2, which are again, Cole Palmer and Mohammed Salah, at least in my opinion. We will discuss Cole Palmer first. Firstly, the Wolves midfield 2 and their system in general. One thing I've noticed with Wolves is not just as a result of their lack of compactness through shape and their approach, but the fact that their midfield 2 aren't really the space-eating types. For example, they're not Amadou Onana, they're not Declan Rice, they're not Carlos Baleba, right? They don't cover huge distances as well as those guys. I think when you can get your better ball players who are better on the ball in and around those pockets, they can really hurt you, especially when the game's in a slightly quicker fashion, right? And they're not able to recover as well. For example, I thought João Gomez was quite good against Nottingham Forest, but that's not the point. It's how he interacts within the game as a whole, how he interacts with the other players, how he interacts with the side, how he interacts with the system, how he interacts with his players. And I don't think that's particularly beneficial for Wolves when defending someone like Cole Palmer. Then, just in general, with the way they press, not super aggressive, but I still think that we'll be able to get through it somewhat. I say a replication of Crystal Palace because one thing I spoke about Palace was Palmer getting in and around the pivot and finding space in front of the centre backs in between the lines, where he hasn't been able to do that so much in fixtures gone by at that time. And I wouldn't be surprised to see somewhat of a replication there. However, there are a few things. One, it's still a thought in my mind that Wolves eventually changes just a little bit their approach, because I don't think, having played the way they did against Forest and the way they did at Newcastle, it's particularly smart for them to continue in the same fashion. If they were just a little bit more compact, they genuinely would be a much more difficult side to beat. But because they play with these spaces that are far bigger than I think they should be between the lines, and not just from a defensive standpoint, but also in attacking, how they shift up as a unit, I personally don't think that's the greatest thing for them. And I do still back the manager to change that. That's just my opinion. And the second thing is, what's Palmer's realistic ceiling? Well, the way I see his avenues to points is very much him producing a moment. Even if he receives, let's say, for example, Wolves decide to jump and press a little bit higher and a bit more aggressively, and we have Romeo Lavia receiving one of the most press-resistant midfielders in the league. He takes it on the half-turn and bang, into Palmer. And now all of a sudden we have not maybe a numerical advantage, but a situation which is advantageous for Palmer, and you expect him to deliver from. Those are the type of situations which I think he'll have. Stuff where, okay, fine, he'll have an advantage, but he's still going to have to go and produce a moment to get goals at least, right? I do think that when we have the ball and we pin them in, they'll be okay, fine. They'll be okay, and they won't be a side that even when they're deep, will just get cut through. And as such, with that in mind, the fact that I think he has to produce moments in this type of game, as opposed to us just running through them, and the fact that Jackson, who's meant to be the guy who's allowing him to get assists, right, isn't really finishing so well at the moment, I do worry about his ceiling ever so slightly. And then the other big thing is, it's difficult to see exactly how it translates, but it can't be a good thing for the opposition. Cunha wasn't there against Forest, and he came off the bench against Newcastle. And when he came off the bench, honestly, they looked a bit better, like straight away. I also think he offers you far more off the ball than Hwang as well, so that's something to know. And it's not like he's playing number 9, right? He's playing off that left-hand side in what I think is probably his best position. So I do think you get a bit more off the ball from Wolves, given Cunha's back. And even just like his carrying from deep and the pressure release, I think all of that will really help. So for me, I don't think this is as close to a slam dunk as it maybe appears, albeit I've listed the positives. And now we can move on to Mohammed Salah. One thing I would say about the decision between the two this week is that it's not the easiest of decisions by any means. And I'm really trying to find some edge, some little bit of analysis, which allows me personally, within my own mind, to safely suggest to myself that, okay, this guy's probably the better option. Even if it's a 51-49 split, I still have him at 2% higher. So some of the analysis, like you just would have had on Palmer, is certainly abstract and somewhat theoretical, as opposed to more practical analysis. For example, me saying, okay, they're going to line up in a 4-4-2 and Palmer won't have access to this space. Rather, it was a little bit more abstract and theoretical. And some of you may not like that, and that's absolutely fine. But in my opinion, is the best way to try and extract an edge in these types of weeks. Moving on to the Egyptian King, there's a few things to discuss here. One, I don't think Brentford are going to really play a 5 at the back again this season. If they are going to, I would say this is one of only 2 games that they're going to do so. The other is when they will travel away to Arsenal and go to the Emirates. But apart from that, I expect them to largely play in back fours, and within that back four system, certainly take quite an aggressive approach. Now, there's a lot to discuss here, and it's largely abstract and theoretical again, but we'll start with Liverpool's build-up versus Brentford's press. Now, is Brentford's press and the way that they press a good thing for your Trent clean sheets, your Van Dijk clean sheets, your Alisson clean sheets, your Arte clean sheets? No, probably not, right? You don't really want to be pressed aggressively all the time, especially when it's at the quality of Brentford's, right? They'll go man-to-man high. I think Wissa will, when he's occupying both of the centre-backs, which he usually does, dependent on who Thomas Frank selects. He doesn't just look to block the passing lane and cut that off, but he'll really look to go and take the ball as well. So is that good there? No. But it does just mean in general that the game will be quicker. And when Liverpool do get through that press, whether it's through putting it into the pivot and Gravenberch takes it on the half turn, McAllister plays, I don't know, bounce pass back and then they go with the diagonal, whether McAllister plays a blind pass because he knows what the player is from scanning before, half blind, I guess, then you could call it, and they get through, and then all of a sudden it's a passage of play which requires Liverpool to be a bit more direct. Well, that's great, right, for Salah, because he'll just get in a little bit more and he'll have more space and he'll have more isolated situations. So in terms of Liverpool winning the game and the defense, no, probably not. But for Salah, I think he'll get more opportunities as a result. And even if Brentford take a slightly more measured approach, I don't mind Van Dijk hitting more long diagonals into Salah, because I've seen how good this guy is utilizing and leveraging his bodies in these zones just to bring the ball down, to create a little bit of separation with his man. And he doesn't necessarily need to be in the closest proximity to the goal, because he can get assists from these brilliant crosses, right? Which most right wingers just don't have in their locker. Well, pretty much all wingers don't have it in their locker, right? He's got so many routes to point. Now, moving on to Salah's routes to point. I think in transition, he can really hurt Brentford. But I also think for the reasons just discussed, in build-up, just quick build-up from Liverpool, they get through, he can really hurt Brentford there. And what I would say is he's got more routes to points from open play than anyone else in the league, because he can deliver crosses from wide areas that players can't. He can score from a variety of angles that players can't. He can manufacture other certain situations that other players can't. He can manufacture shots from certain positions that other players can't. So I like that. And in a game where I actually expect him to get some isolated situation, probably at a higher volume than he's used to, or maybe around there, right? I don't think it'll be lower. I think that's a good thing for him being able to leverage this talent. What I would say is when Liverpool do pen Brentford in, it's going to be more difficult than it would another side, because they're so well drilled, quite physical, very compact, and from there it's going to be pretty difficult. But if you did want one right winger in the world to unlock it, it'd probably be this guy. So that's that. And then I've already discussed his volume of potential opportunities. I don't think they'll be anywhere lower than they normally are, probably a little bit higher. What I would say, however, is he blanked away at Forest, and whilst the last 20-30 minutes he certainly could have had a haul, let alone a return, he is probably drew some form of a regression. They also lost away at Spurs, and whilst it was in the EFL Cup, that's technically a blank as well. Yeah, sure, he got 7 points against Man United, but they drew. They didn't win again, and that was probably his least effective game in the Premier League this season, at least in terms of him being likely to score points. And at times this season, he's definitely, I would say, not got so lucky, but he's definitely overperformed what you would expect. I think overperformance as a concept is a slightly interesting one, which we can delve into, and I don't agree with it as much, or used at least, especially when it comes to players of this caliber. But I do think the level that he was performing at, in terms of output at least, compared to the performance, probably a little bit overdone. So is there ever a possibility for this to be the regression? The momentum's kind of there, right? It's 3 not so good performances on the bounce. It's 3 games in a row which Liverpool haven't won. If you take out the FA Cup game, yeah, potentially. And I'm well aware of that. And I don't really like betting against momentum either. But here, I am just going to trust that for the analysis, there's more positives associated to Salah than there are Palmer. And I will be going there whilst understanding the risk and understanding it post. Now, something we always talk about in this section, and usually very early on, is EO. I think Salah's EO will be higher than Palmer, just because so many more people own him and people feel a lot safer captaining him. But just like last week, I think more of the engaged managers captain Palmer, and the fact that the models have Palmer higher at the moment, And last time they only had him higher by like 0.1, 0.2. This week it's by a lot more, especially because he's at home and Salah's away, which was the same last week. But I guess Bournemouth and Wolves, the difference kicks in. They'll probably be going there. So I'll just look at it as a positive. I'll happily take the potential rank gain over the engaged managers as opposed to the general field this week and proceed from there. But like I say on the side, it's not about that. I do genuinely just think Salah is a better option this week. So 99.9% likely, if not 100% likely, I'll be captaining Mohammed Salah. Moving on to the man who won last week's captaincy debate, Alexander Isak. And he won it in some style. I mean, to finish 6 points above the guy who came second, and in this case, Cole Palmer, is very impressive, especially when you consider the level of competition in Salah and Cole Palmer, right? Secondly, there's quite literally nothing bad about his captaincy prospects this week in isolation. Stylistically, a very suitable fixture. We've talked so many times on this channel about how the number 9 is the guy you want against Bournemouth, not so much the wingers. And that trend has continued pretty much throughout the season. All right, fine. Not 100% correlation, but not so far off it. And he's also in the form of his life. Newcastle are flying. He's at home. He's looking to go 9-9. And who knows, maybe he'll end up breaking the record. And he'll be hungry for it. He'll absolutely be hungry for it. All strikers are of that breed, good ones. And as such, I don't have a single bad thing to say about him. However, with all that being said, I'm not going to captain him. Why? Well, number one, he's a forward. And some of you may disagree with this, but I am looking to maximize my ceiling. And when Palmer exists and when Salah exists in that midfield category, there's no reason for me to start behind the 8 ball, especially if I don't think that he is absolutely the best captain choice. Right? I said there's nothing bad about him. I didn't say he's the best, however. And then the second thing is, of all the 4 oppositions, Southampton, Brentford, Wolves, and Bournemouth, I personally think Bournemouth are the best side out of all of them. You could argue Bournemouth and Brentford, but personally, I've got them a little bit above them. So for that reason, I'm just not going to captain him. And I'm not going to go into it too much more because it really is just that simple. He is a forward, and that's one reason. But the main reason is that Bournemouth are just better than all of those sides. I think that there is definitely a version of this game where Bournemouth score and then they make it more difficult for Newcastle, kind of similar to how they did it against us. So for that reason, I will not be captaining him. Sticking with Mohammed Salah's team, Liverpool. Now, we are going to take a look at the best assets to bring in ahead of the double game week. But before we start with Liverpool, let's start with Everton. I don't know, I just feel like doing that. I really wouldn't. Not a single one. Not for me. Now, I was on Green Arrow earlier today, which some of you may have seen. And Fergie spoke about potentially bringing in DCL. And honestly, whilst we were on the call and on the stream, I was actually being talked into it a little bit more. And it was really David Moyes' comment which pushed me over the line. When a manager goes out and backs you like that, and I don't feel like David Moyes is the type to dress it up to be something it's not, I think his minutes will be very secure. And he's actually a very, very good footballer. And you may disagree with that, but you take his finishing deficiencies away this season. He's done a lot of good things. And he's also playing in a system that's very, very difficult. And he has a very difficult role. And I think some of the things he does carry out are underappreciated just because they won't result in goals. Right? And other people aren't helping him out as much. Anyway, I still probably wouldn't be going there, right? Mainly because I do not think it's the most efficient use of transfer. Yeah, sure, you get Leicester at home, but I don't even think that's that good for reasons we discussed with Southampton. I don't think anyone's a slam dunk this season, certainly at the moment. Maybe earlier in the season, sure, we looked at sides and we're like, all right, we can have a bit of that and we can expect a big haul, but not so much anymore. You wouldn't want them after, so you have to transfer them in, you have to transfer them out. You're going to lose a little bit of value here and there. You're going to lose transfers. And it's not just the fact that you lose a transfer, it's the fact that you can't use it anywhere else, right? It's the opportunity cost of that. So I don't like that option. Njai, similar sort of thinking. McNeil, similar sort of thinking, but even worse because he hasn't had any minutes recently, so you don't know how his body is. And then moving on to the defense. Okay, fine, I could be a little bit more open to this, but Pickford's actually fairly expensive now. And there are a lot of keepers, for example, like Henderson. I know he blanks in 29. But aside from that, 4-5, I prefer him. I think he's got better fixtures, which is somewhat interesting considering what I've got on Munoz later, but you'll understand when I get there. And then Mikolenko, Tarkowski, Brandway, I don't think it's worth taking out one of Robinson, Hall, Gabriel, Van Dijk, Trent, Guardiola. Just missing one of those. Guardiola doesn't get into that category. I take that back. You get one of those in, especially when you consider you will have to use a transfer. So for me, Everton assets, no. Mainly because of the opportunity cost and the fact that it's just an inefficient use of transfer. Moving on to Liverpool. Salah, lock. Trent, for me, lock. Across Ipswich at home, Bournemouth away, Everton away, and Wolves at home, obviously it can happen, but I think it's unlikely that as long as he's playing well, which I expect him to, he doesn't get one attacking return in those 4 games. And as such, I think even statistically, it would be quite unlikely for him to do that. Because it would mean that if he didn't do that, he's averaging less than 1 in 4 a game, and he averages more than 9 attacking returns in previous seasons, right? Even this season, not so. So what I would say is Trent probably gets an attacking return. He also probably gets a clean sheet across those 4 games. And if he pairs them together, that alone would pretty much pay back your investment. Earlier, not even early in the season, well, it was early in the season, but not so long ago, I ran a little experiment on my team, and I wanted to see how many points per game my defensive unit was averaging. Now, I've lined up with a back 3 plus a goalkeeper every single week, and I think I did it in game week 20, and it was averaging 3.775 points a game. If I turned that to 4, I'd be about 20 points up and probably find myself around top 10k. So averaging 4 points per game as a defender, if it's the whole unit, is very solid. It really is. Obviously, in short bursts, when you're paying more and looking to attack the upside, you would prefer to have more. But if Trent gets like a 12-pointer, well, you only need 16 for us to fulfill that, right? And he's got 3 games. Even if he keeps 1 clean sheet outside of that, okay, he's now on 18. Say +2 and +2. That's 22. That's 5.5 points a game. It's very solid. And it's not 5.5 points per game week. It's 5.5 points per game because it's only 3 game weeks, right? So there's a massive, massive upside, I would say, to getting Trent, and a very healthy floor as well. So for me, non-negotiable. And he's looked good. He's looked good enough to get attacking returns. I think at times this season it's actually been quite unfortunate, and we'd probably be viewing it a little bit differently had someone like myself been punished a little bit more there. I don't like Alisson at all. I think it compromises the squad structure. I've been so anti the premium keeper for a long time now for that reason. And also the ceiling's limited, and the opportunity cost of Van Dijk, Trent, Gakpo all doing better. Konate, I don't mind the gamble because he really seems to be favored by Slot. So his minutes should be good. But as you will see in a couple of slides, his schedule is very intense. And maybe with his fitness concerns, he misses one of the Premier League games, albeit I'm not so sure. So you might want to go there, you might not. But Van Dijk's got better aerial threat anyway, and he just gives you that security of minutes if you don't want the headache. And then going forward, he's probably a little bit of a better keep as well. Which leads us to Cody Gakpo or Virgil van Dijk. Now, I'm not going to discuss Cody Gakpo here. We'll do so in the next section. He's actually got his own slide after the Jackson bit. But Van Dijk is just super secure. Rich made a good point about how he's always got this thing about scoring in doubles. Now, that's not a very rational reason to bring him in, but it just shows that he's got goals, right? And he's done it in the past. Not so much because it's a double game week. He's just scored goals. And he certainly does look a threat from set pieces and corners. Not so much like Gabriel does, albeit they have adopted their routine slightly. If you watch it, they crowd the back post. Van Dijk will be the one in the middle. Someone will have to try and block him, and then he'll try and come onto the header, right? And especially when you've got Trent delivering, and even Chimikas has got a very good delivery. The goal's on. So I don't think anyone can tell you it's a bad option. Now, yeah, Liverpool are going through a bit of a decline. Even the stats say that from a defensive standpoint. Maybe they're having a little bit of a regression, like a medium length regression. And that could certainly be a possibility. But over those 4 fixtures, still expect at least 1 clean sheet. And I do genuinely think that the goal is coming kind of soon. So I wouldn't mind having him. And we'll talk about Gakpo later, and then we can kind of decide which one's better. Whilst benching dilemmas has become a staple piece in solving your problems, this particular section appears to have become a staple piece in everything you need. Should we be keeping or selling Nicholas Jackson? Now, this week, I would say I am slightly more open to it, but there as well. It is situational. If you have Nicholas Jackson and the transfer is very much in a precious condition, because you could use it next week to unlock a whole host of moves. For example, take my case, having 4 frees as opposed to 3 frees unlocks a huge world of possibilities for myself next week. And yeah, sure, I could take a hit, but do I really want to take a hit next week? No, right? So holding the transfer, for myself at least, is a lot more attractive, and thus selling Nicholas Jackson becomes a lot more unattractive. However, in your case, you might just want to, or you might be able to sell Jackson and have no repercussions of a similar nature. Or you might just be so high on Chris Wood this week, you don't care. You just want him for that Southampton at home, right? So I will go on to the replacements in a little bit. However, I go back to saying that it is very much situational, and I wouldn't be judging it on him so much. I would be judging it on your situation. Is this the most efficient transfer that you could potentially use at a time where they are so precious and the game state is so delicate? That's where my focus would be, not what his expected points are, because they are good enough whereby it's not the biggest problem in the world. All right, fine. If he was nailed on for a blank this week, if you knew that he was going to play the entire game in his own box and not have a shot, then yeah, fine. But that's not the case, right? He's still probably going to accumulate a fair few amount of chances, or at least he should. Okay. With that being said, I just want to discuss his ceiling, because if he's missing at this volume, regardless of how many he accumulates, well, not regardless, but being slightly realistic about it, it's going to be very difficult for him to access 2 returns. And even when he does, he'll have hurt himself on the bonus point system. And when he returns, Palmer usually does as well. And Palmer is a bonus point monster. Some of you would have seen that he was actually on 2 bonus after Semenyo scored. And he finishes like 10 points above him on the bonus point system, even though he didn't return again. And someone else scored on his team. So for all of those reasons, I would say that his ceiling is definitely getting to the stage where it's starting to get quite capped. And on this channel, we've always spoken about having high ceiling assets. So, if you are absolutely adamant and you're in the situation when you can take him out, you can do so. But I don't think the fixtures are necessarily warranting of a certain sell, nor are his expected points. But moving on to the replacements, I didn't say much about Chris Wood there because there's not really much I need to say. The fixtures are pretty good. It's Southampton at home. You want to buy him. He's in the form of his life. Go ahead. Not really. What can anyone say to you that's so bad about it, right? There's really not much to say that's negative about Chris Wood. Johan Wissa is someone I like. Okay, fine, it's Liverpool, and it's not a very attractive fixture. But after that, I think it's open to interpretation, but I quite like it. I think Palace away, for reasons we'll discuss shortly, isn't as hard as it potentially was maybe a few weeks ago. I think the Brentford attack and how aggressive their system is and the volume of opportunities that they create for their players, specifically Brian Mbeumo and Johan Wissa, is fantastic. And when you look at his XGI, it's super high. I think he ranks 5th amongst all forwards. And at his price, at 6'2", he's so cheap. Wonderful facilitator as well, with a very healthy and accessible ceiling. So I like Wissa a lot. Mateta I'm lower on, and we're going to talk about Palace a little bit later. But the main reason is, one, he's more expensive than these guys. That's not the main reason. That's one reason. The main reason is the fixtures. West Ham away, not that easy. Not under Potter, for the reasons we discussed in Transfer Plan yesterday. Brentford at home, okay, yeah, that's pretty good. And then after that, again, Man United away. From a defensive standpoint, if Man United do look to approach that in a little bit more of a defensive mindset, because I think that's when they're honestly better, then I don't think that's so easy for Mateta as well. And then even sprinkled around that, like in the medium term, there's Fulham away. Then you can buy in a blank game week that you have to sell him as well. I'm just not as high on him as I previously was as a result. And I also think losing Trevor Chalobah decreases their quality as a side, and I think that will have some effect throughout the whole team. I'm only a little bit lower than him, not too much, but a little bit lower. And then Cody Gakpo. Now let's discuss. The Liverpool schedule discussed earlier can be seen on screen, and I think I'm right in saying that means it is 9 games in 30 days for them, and considering their travel as well, it is quite an intense schedule. And I will be going through it just to try and give you my perspective on what Cody Gakpo's expected minutes. I personally think he's absolutely first choice. And as such, when I've reviewed the schedule, I think there are a maximum of 2 benchings for him here. One would be Plymouth away, and then the other would be either PSV away or Bournemouth away. He's first choice for me, so he starts Brentford away. No reason for him not to. They'll probably want to have the UCL wrapped up, not just the top 8, but top spot, which they can't do in match day 7, I think it is. But regardless, they want to at least take a big step towards that. So I think he starts Lille at home. And likewise, Ipswich at home, no reason for him not to start that. Now, I would say, especially if their Champions League campaign is in stellar condition, it would actually be a decent time to rest him. But given he's Dutch and given his old club is PSV, I think he'd be itching to play that game. And as such, I wouldn't be surprised, just given its unique situation, if Slot gives him the nod and starts him against PSV. And then at some point, almost has to take a rest unless it's constantly reduced expected minutes, which is a possibility. For example, Brentford, Lille, Ipswich maybe plays like 70 on average, and then Bournemouth he gets benched. Potentially, right, which would be for the first game of the double, which you wouldn't love. Or he's like, okay, fine, we've got the Champions League largely wrapped up. You're getting benched away at PSV, and I'm going to play you away at Bournemouth because I think that's more important, and I need to give you one rest. Alternatively, maybe he just plays all 5 of those games, and he just has reduced expected minutes for pretty much all of those. And when I say plays, I mean starts. I think he definitely starts the home game at Spurs and for the EFL Cup. I think that'll be pretty much first choice looking to get to Wembley. And then he should definitely be on the bench for Plymouth. You look at the turnaround between the 6th and the 8th, And with all due respect to Plymouth, you still expect Liverpool to get the job done with a slightly weaker side. So I think he's benched for that. And then he plays Everton away, Wolves at home, because there's enough of a gap for him to rest and recover. So I would say a maximum of 1 benching that can impact you, but it'll be a toss-up between that and PSV. And who knows, maybe he just starts all 5. So I think in terms of expected minutes, you'll lose some in terms of the fact that he'll get subbed off, but otherwise you should largely be fine. Of course, he's not like a Kai Havertz who's going to play 90 minutes, game in, game out, but you know that when buying him. So if you think he's worth that risk, buy him. Otherwise, Van Dijk is always there. And I mainly did this as a Jackson report. 2 of the managers who reside in the top 50 in the world currently can be found in our community. If you would like to associate with such brilliant managers such as themselves, if you would like access to the exclusive WhatsApp community group with regular football analysis that I do not share anywhere else, frequent FPL help at all times from the very helpful members in the group, or the Diamond Call where you can get 1-hour Q&As, which largely can extend past that to go into some deeper tactical talk, your team specifically, where we'll plan it as well, amongst a variety of other things, then do consider purchasing the membership. Try it for a month, and if you don't enjoy it, by all means cancel. But I've got a feeling you will. And as I've said a few times, there's minimum downside to this, but a whole lot of upside. I am not as keen on the purchase of Daniel Munoz as I have been in weeks gone by. And I actually think from next week, he could potentially sell. Let me explain why. Firstly, the fixtures, and that's the big thing. I don't think Graham Potter's West Ham away at the London Stadium will be particularly easy. I think they showed enough against Fulham, whereby I wouldn't be surprised if Palace concede. Brentford always have goals in them. Going away to Manchester United is never, ever going to be easy under Ruben Amorim, right? It may not be the toughest of fixtures, but I don't think it'll be easy. I think United certainly have goals in them, especially if they don't try and force it too much as they have in games gone by. Everton is fine after that, but then Fulham away, not easy. Aston Villa at home, not easy, right? And as such, I don't think there are too many clean sheets from there. The other thing is, without Trevor Chalobah, I don't think they'll be as good of a defensive unit, so that decreases the likelihood of potential clean sheets. Then, the efficiency of transfer / opportunity cost. Remember, I'm not telling you to sell him this week, just not buying him. I think you want to prioritize the Liverpool assets with your transfers, and if not, moving a squad, or at least keeping transfers whereby you can restructure so that you don't have to free hit in Blank Gaming 29, which is also why it's a point there. So for all of those reasons, I wouldn't be buying him personally. Still a good asset. I just don't think he's quite good enough to justify a buy this week. And then secondly, some of you have been asking, should you sell Raya or Gabriel? If you asked me at a fair few points this season, I would have been okay selling Raya. And I think it's fine if you use him as a cash cow to upgrade elsewhere and you really need the money there. But I would say with the specific fixtures that he has, there's a decent ceiling to all of those games. And as such, there's a potential haul, and you probably want to keep him. And again, I don't think it's the most efficient use of a transfer, certainly using it on a goalkeeper, unless he blocks, for example, the upgrade to Trent or Van Dijk or Gakpo because of the cash you've got stored there. I wouldn't be selling Gabriel in most cases. I think he's got a 15-pointer in there. It's coming. And hopefully for owners, they get it sooner rather than later. And who knows, maybe more than one. There should be some clean sheets over the next 5. I expect 2 with how tough the fixtures are. I would say, though, if you want to sell him, it's not the worst sell in the world. And it's not the worst time to sell Gabriel either. The defense doesn't look unbelievable. I think having Partey at 6 for a lot of it is going to be difficult in transition. And we saw that against Spurs, and I did some analysis on that yesterday. So for those reasons, and the fact that he might act as a blocker, again, because of his price, to one of the Liverpool assets, who I think you should prioritize, I don't mind selling him, but you must realize the risk that you are selling arguably the highest ceiling defender in the game, or the highest floor and ceiling combined defender in the game. Not a priority sell by any means. I just don't think he's the worst sell in the world. Albeit, in most cases, I would try not to do it. And as such, I wouldn't be putting such emphasis on 29 that you miss out on all these points in the short to medium term, right? Because he does look very good, and so do Newcastle. Moving on to Bruno Fernandes. And again, this will look very bad if he hauls. But I don't trust them. I still haven't seen them do it against a side where they're meant to force it and they're meant to take it to the other team. I still think he'll get minutes in the pivot. I still think he's quite expensive. He'll act as a blocker. And I think as more of the expensive assets come back into the fray, like the Liverpool assets, money's going to become a more important factor, where it hasn't been as much recently. How many times have you gone on X and seen this minus 0.1 image that you always see? Not so often. You usually see that all the time because of the lack of Haalands and the cheap facilitators that have been absolutely brilliant. But I think the game is going to slightly divert away from that, if not significantly. And as such, I really would be careful with buying Bruno Fernandes, even if he does haul against Southampton. And I honestly wouldn't mind selling him in some cases if he's can be utilized as a cash cow. And that is all she wrote for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I do hope you enjoyed. 310 likes is the target on this video, and I would be very grateful to hit that, as I would 7,000 subscribers. So if you are a regular viewer around here who has not subscribed, consider doing so, or if you're a new viewer around here, to cash in on some of the luck and to make sure you don't miss out on any of the analysis. I'm sure the Salah captain will have some interesting debates going on in the comments, but regardless, I wish you the best of luck, and I shall see you anyway for solving your problems and team selection tomorrow. Goodbye.